Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is our 140th episode on March 23rd, 2023. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
And my name is Sunsara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show, and we want to welcome all of you tuning in, including all of our Patreons, and especially those of you who are on the live Patreon-only Zoom with Andy and Pete this last weekend. I know it was very rich.
Yeah, it was great, Sunsara. This is a show about the whole world. And for a radically new world, every week we bring alive the reality that there's a whole better way that humanity could be living. And for this to be real, we need to make a real revolution.
What do we mean by revolution? This is a question that we put to the far-sighted revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, who we promote and follow on this show, and who we got a chance to interview last fall. So you've dedicated your whole life, over decades, to making revolution and emancipating humanity. And I want to talk about revolution. It's a word that people throw around all the time. And people mean radically, very wildly different things when they use it. What is a real revolution, and why is that necessary?
Well, it's not a new variation of Charmin toilet paper. Okay, that's the first thing we can say. You know, it's not a change just in the culture, to be more serious. It means that you actually overthrow the existing system and replace it with a different system. That's what an actual revolution is. And yes, you know, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of people. I remember, you know, after I think it was Parkland shooting, you know, there was big rallies that were held, and one of the students from there, you know, got up to speak at one of these big rallies, and the first thing he said was, "Welcome to the revolution," because there were, you know, large numbers, masses of people there. Well, masses of people are one important ingredient of a revolution. You don't make a revolution with a handful of people. You need, you know, millions of people ultimately to make a revolution. But the question is, what are those people fighting for? What are they aiming for? Are they aiming just to make changes within the existing system, or are they actually recognizing that you cannot bring about the positive resolution of all these different horrors that exist in this country, and we could go through them, but in the world as a whole? You know, you cannot bring about a positive resolution to that, an elimination of all that, within the confines of this system. That is another scientifically determined, evidence-based truth. And so therefore, a revolution means that you overthrow the system in order to, you know, bring into being a completely different foundation in how the economy functions, different relations among people that are not oppressive, a different culture that, instead of reinforcing all this garbage and oppression, actually reinforces emancipating relations among people and emancipating ideas among people, you know, and all the political structures also are transformed in order to serve the further transformation of society, to uproot all the underlying basis for all this exploitation and oppression. That's a revolution. Nothing short of that is an actual revolution.
We have an incredible show today. The Revcoms are on the move, and at the same time, the imperialists are moving to destroy the world as we know it. So today, we have a really packed program. We want to start today's program with Rafael Caderas, a member of the RNL team, speaking about a recent indictment of Vladimir Putin for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, which was huge news all across this country for the past week.
Last week, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Putin.
The International Criminal Court has issued 2 warrants of arrest in the Ukraine situation. For Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and for Maria Lvova-Belova for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation.
There does seem to be evidence that Russia has carried out abductions of children, as well as other war crimes during the Ukraine war, including targeting and killing tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians.
He's clearly committed war crimes.
But wait a minute. Who's calling who a war criminal? Let's start with the glaring irony that this ICC arrest warrant for war crimes was issued on March 17th, just 2 days before the 20th anniversary of the US invasion of Iraq, a completely unprovoked war of aggression based on blatant lies that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and was linked to Al-Qaeda.
Weapons of mass destruction.
The weapons of mass destruction.
The weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
Joe Biden played a key role not only in voting for this war, but in spreading the lies used to justify it.
Iraq and Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Al-Qaeda, which is now in Iraq.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda.
This criminal invasion and the brutal occupation that followed led to the deaths of over 300,000 people directly in the fighting, and another 600,000 people at least from the destruction caused by the war. Over 4.5 million people were driven from their homes. And as horrific as these statistics are, they don't fully capture the horror of what the US did to the Iraqi people. They raided people's houses, beat them, humiliated them, raped them, and yes, killed them on routine patrols.
A civilian jury in western Kentucky convicted Green of raping the teenager, shown here as a young girl, as well as conspiracy and multiple counts of murder. At this house on March 12, 2006, Green allegedly shot and killed the teen's mother, father, and sister, and then became the third soldier to rape the girl before shooting her in the face. Her body was set on fire at the home about 20 miles south of Baghdad. Inside the house, splattered bloodstains cover the floor and walls. Green told the judge he merely followed orders from other soldiers involved in the attack.
They surrounded Fallujah, cut off food and water to the city of 300,000 people, dropped cluster bombs and white phosphorus chemical weapons, both of which are illegal under international law. And then they laid waste to the entire city, destroying mosques, schools, bridges, power plants, train stations, sanitation, and telephone systems. In Haditha, rampaging U.S. Marines spent 5 hours going door to door, executing 24 men, women, and children, including a 2-year-old.
They burst into houses, killing 24 people. But they were all unarmed. 5 were children. The names they wrote to practice their handwriting are still on the walls.
The U.S. threw thousands into prisons, where military police and CIA carried out sadistic torture, including sexual torture. To this day, the Iraqi people continue to suffer the after effects of this towering crime against humanity. And this is just one of countless American crimes. Here we have hypocrisy on top of hypocrisy. Not only is the president of the world's #1 crime syndicate accusing others of war crimes, he's celebrating the justice of the International Criminal Court that the US is not even a signatory of. In fact, the US has attacked the ICC for decades. And in 2017, when the ICC finally concluded that it had enough evidence to show that US forces had committed torture in Afghanistan, as well as in secret CIA black sites around the world, US officials denounced the court and revoked the visa of the chief prosecutor.
The United States is not a party to the ICC, and we will take all necessary measures to protect our citizens from this renegade, unlawful so-called court.
Yet now, Biden and others in the US ruling class find this International Criminal Court to be a legitimate authority, as long as it only prosecutes the US's enemies like Russia. As the former slave and freedom fighter Frederick Douglass famously said, "For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, the US reigns without a rival."
Later in the show, I'll be bringing you an installment of our new series, Woke Idiocy versus the Revolution Humanity Needs. The wokesters and the fascists both take up an epistemology that is a framework for understanding what is true that denies objective reality. Both insist that the truth is whatever they say it is, or whatever serves their political objectives. This is not just unscientific, this is aggressively anti-scientific. Stay with us, because after that, Andy will speak with John Hedlund, a member of the RevCom Environmental Writers Group, about the devastating new climate report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
We're really at a time and a moment in history right now where what we do over the next few years will impact the next thousands of years. We have as you said, a very short and rapidly closing window of time.
But first, Andy is going to speak about and then introduce a segment from the interviews that he and I did with Bob Avakian.
Last fall, Sunsara and I had the extraordinary opportunity to interview Bob Avakian on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. These interviews are available on our YouTube channel at YouTube.com/the RevComs. As an article that's on our website, revcom.us, observed, quote, "What is concentrated in these interviews is objectively a game changer. There is simply no one and nothing else like this, and any decent, honest, intellectually curious person who cares about the state of the world and watches these will be transformed," end quote. Bob Avakian BA goes at so many different urgent questions, unrehearsed, with science, passion, and a whole lot of clarity. He wields science, applying the scientific method and the approach of the new communism to solving the excruciatingly and seemingly unsolvable problems that are confronting humanity. He breaks down and brings alive the problem that we face in the system we live under. That's at the root of all that we face, from the danger of nuclear war.
All this ridiculous stuff, people sticking their heads down, or, I stay in my own lane. You think if there's a nuclear war, it won't touch your lane?
To what this system does to black and brown youth.
The mass shooting of black people, Latinos, and Native Americans by police is way bigger than any individual. You have to think in big terms about how are we going to deal with these big problems that are way bigger than any individual.
The scope of these talks is nothing less than the whole world. Bob Avakian goes at these questions like nobody else. He speaks to and challenges the youth brought up in the vicious world who learn to mimic the big-time gangsters who run this country, with tragic and heartbreaking consequences.
There's this whole notion that, if you aren't fucking over somebody else, you're weak. The choices are not being the fucker or being fucked over. The choices are being enslaved or emancipated.
He speaks of the import of beauty in the natural world and in art. Why to appreciate Shakespeare as well as art and literature from around the world?
The kind of world we're aiming for is not one where that kind of beauty is discounted or, suppressed, but one where the human being's need for that is given much fuller expression.
This comes alive in funny childhood and high school memories with deep lessons for today.
I consider one of the great things about Berkeley was that it only has one public high school. And so when you go to that public high school, you're thrown together with everybody.
He doesn't shirk from the harsh reality that is bearing down on us, with the future hanging in the balance as the system of capitalism and imperialism takes us to the edge of nuclear annihilation and climate catastrophe. He breaks down the workings of the system so vividly and clearly that at one and the same time, someone without much education can understand it, and someone with a whole lot of schooling is compelled to confront the actual reality that is the system at the root of what we face today. Most of all, the interviews bring that we don't have to put up with any of this. A radically different and far better world through a real revolution to overthrow this system is possible. Speaking particularly of the heightened danger of nuclear war, BA says, quote, "We can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to rule over us. They need to be overthrown as soon as possible," end quote. By the time you get to the end of these three interviews, you feel this possibility, even if you never considered it before. This last weekend, we had a chance to talk with some people about these interviews, and a young person who watched the interviews and is now working with one of the Revolution Clubs minced no words when she said that the BA interviews are an intervention in this rare time when the future hangs in the balance, a moment when revolution could be possible. The interviews, she said, is why I'm here. Well, let me be equally direct. When we make the case on this show that the roadmap for this moment is one of either a truly terrible future, even existential, or something truly emancipating, the latter future, the future where we could get beyond all the degradation, exploitation, oppression, war, destruction, requires a real revolution. And this revolution requires you and millions more to get into it. And the invitation, the introduction, the feeling and the substance of the future that is possible, the society, the world that really could be, all that is what BA brings in these interviews. And for this reason, there's a need for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to watch these interviews now. For this to happen requires sharp and persistent struggle against all the ways of thinking that hold people back. What BA does in the interviews, what we do on this show, is take off the blinders. We expose the reality behind the facade, strip away the mirror of the me that is embedded in the phone. Take what BA brings. Take what we bring in this show and be a part of shaking and waking people up. Provoke them, challenge them, inspire them to see how they are thinking about things is not how things actually are. America's not the good guys. When the police murder our youth over and over again, they are just doing their job. They are not there to serve and protect anything but the system. Thinking that you have your own reality is absolutely ridiculous. Reality is reality for everyone. There is no savior from heaven or the Democratic Party coming to save you. We face a system. It hasn't been forever, and it need not be forever. Watch these interviews with Bob Avakian. Feel it and come to know what really could be. We have said that these interviews are full of heart and soul and hardcore for revolution. And over the last several weeks on the RNL Show, we have shown parts of the interviews on war, on abortion, on the youth, on the liberation of women and the emancipation of humanity. Today, we want to show you the heart and soul of BA and what that says about the kind of revolution he is leading, the kind of movement that we are building, the kind of people that all of us strive to be today and really could be in a radically new society. Well, you've already taken us to what we wanted to end the first interview with you on the show, and by singing, I think, at least 3 times on this show, which has been great, because what we wanted to do is in 2003, you gave a talk that we call the Revolution Talk, and I don't know, hours into it, all of a sudden you burst into song, a Ry Cooder song, Across the Borderline.
Now my voice is hoarse, but I'm going to give this a try. There's a land, so I've been told.
And then later on, a decade later, I guess the band Outer National took that and put it into a song that we've played many times on the show.
There's a land, so I've been told. Every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline.
And then you've also spoken, see, you've taken a lot of things out from what we said. I just want to make sure everybody sees this. We were just talking before about these are 45 records. Yeah. Okay, this is vinyl's not coming back in this form. But look, this is your memoir, From Ike to Mao and Beyond, my journey from mainstream America to revolutionary communist. But there you are with the record. So, and you just spoke about the influence of the culture, black culture. But we wanted to ask you about this, because you've written and talked about how if you don't have a poetic spirit, or at least a poetic side, it's very dangerous for you to lead a Marxist movement or be the leader of a socialist state. This question of the poetic side, and you've written about, including to people of our, who've not had a formal education, the importance of Shakespeare and how you can understand that. You've spoken some already tonight about the influence of black music on you, but poetry, literature, these are things that have had a big influence on you. So we wanted to ask you two things. One, how did this shape you, who you are? And then more, why does it matter to have a poetic spirit to lead a revolution?
Well, you see, you held up that memoir cover, and you see that tells you what at the time I thought looked cool. So, so you can draw your own conclusions about that. What does it reflect about the times and perhaps about me at the time too? But
well, you missed a whole discussion here last night about the Beach Boys, and then what happened in the move to black culture and all the developments. But
well, I'm sorry I missed it. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. But to get to your question, look, I think human beings need. This is a point that's been made, but it's important to keep coming back to this. Human beings need to be amazed. That's part of what it means to be human. You get amazed when you see an amazing painting or a cultural performance or something someone does in athletics, and you get a certain joy from being amazed at something, especially in a positive way. And this is one element of it. But more generally, human beings have a need for beauty. And beauty comes in many different forms. It comes in nature. And yes, different people do find different things beautiful, but still there's a need for beauty. It comes in nature, it comes in music, it comes in poetry, it comes in literature generally. It comes in many different forms. A sunset and so on and so forth. If the kind of world we're aiming for is not one where that kind of beauty is discounted or, suppressed, but one where the human being's need for that is given much fuller expression. And a lot of that is suppressed in people. Life is so hard for so many people, and things are so bitter that they don't, and they're scuffling so hard they don't even have the chance to enjoy much beauty, though they do find ways even so. So, the kind of world we're aiming for is a world where the human ability to, appreciate beauty in many different forms would be given much fuller expression. And that links up with the question. There's also beauty in the intellectual realm. Look at this, telescope and what it's showing us about the universe. There's beauty in that. There's wonder in that. Isn't that important for human beings to have a full life? And the same when you're trying to solve a problem, not just a political problem, but trying to understand a phenomenon in nature, and then you finally do understand it. It's a very exhilarating experience. The same is true in literature, like you mentioned Shakespeare. Well, a lot of Shakespeare language is archaic. It means it's outdated. It means language that people all would have understood generally at the time, but not all of it, not even most of it. But some of it is language that we no longer use. Most people don't go around saying forsooth and so on and so forth, and there are other expressions that are even, more abstract to people, or, unfamiliar to people now. But there's a lot of beauty in the language of Shakespeare. And let's be clear. There are a lot of dead people who are not white who have also created a lot of beauty in the world, and too much of that has been suppressed. But there are also dead white men who have created a lot of beauty, and we should not be prevented from enjoying that as well. And Shakespeare is one of them. The language is beautiful. As I said in my memoir, I enjoy puns. There are all kinds of puns in Shakespeare. Some of them are better than others. But there are all kinds of humor. There's even malapropisms, which means misusing or a word, saying a word wrong, or I remember one. I think it's in Macbeth, the play Macbeth, which by the way was a favorite of Huey Newton. He used to quote Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace from day to day, etc. But earlier in there's a scene where there's this drunken gatekeeper at one of the castles, and he opens the gate and he starts rambling on, and at one point he says, makes a comparison. He says, but comparisons are odorous. Now it's actually supposed to be comparisons are odious, Odious means hateful. But he's drunk and he does a malapropism. He says, but after all, comparisons are odorous. Means they stink, you know. So, you know, even things like that are, you know, I get a kick out of it. You know, it's funny. You know, it's a good use of a malapropism. You know, it's a good use of language, you know, and distorting language for the purpose of humor. You know, and different people like different poets, you know, modern poetry from the Romantic period. You know, I happen to like Keats as I was growing up. I found the language very evocative. You know, it made me think about a lot of things, and it also just, it created a certain feeling. Beyond just, you know, what it made me think about, created a certain feeling. You know, bright star, were I as steadfast as thou art. You know, just you're looking at a star and saying, okay, this star is, you know, seems to have a lot of constancy. It's there all the time. You know, would that I could be as firm as that. You know, just, you know, things like that, you know, make you think, make you feel. If you don't have an appreciation for that, then when you turn to politics, you're going to tend to be very dogmatic. And you're going to be very dry, and nobody's going to live in any kind of world that you have anything to do with setting the terms of. At least I certainly wouldn't, and I don't think most people would. So this is what I mean when I say, you know, you don't have to write poetry. That's not my point. But, you know, you have to have an appreciation for beauty in all these different kinds of ways, or else you're not aiming for the kind of society that we need to be aiming for, where human beings can really thrive in the fullest way and in the fullest dimensions.
Last week, rabidly conservative author and commentator Bethany Mandel was promoting her new book, which dedicates an entire chapter to calling out wokeness when she was asked a simple question: to define what she meant by woke. In a clip that, as she predicted, went viral, she completely choked on her answer.
What does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. It's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
This became the occasion for all kinds of different people to air their own views about wokeness. Not surprisingly, many seized on Mandel's flub to insist that there is no such thing, and no real danger posed by wokeness on the left. So in today's installment of our series, Woke Idiocy versus the Revolution Humanity Needs, we are going to show just how wrong this is. Woke insanity is real, and it is doing tremendous damage. It is disorienting and paralyzing huge numbers of people, especially students and youth, who urgently need to be thinking critically, seeking out the source of the very real and intensifying white supremacy, male supremacy, destruction to this planet, and imperialist wars that are built into this system, and to the real solution to all this in an actual revolution. Ironically, despite very different political programs and visions of the world that they each hold, this wokeness has a lot in common with the fascists. And as Bob Avakian has insightfully analyzed, the two actually reinforce each other, even as the fascists are far more dangerous and pose the far greater threat to humanity's future and are carrying out much greater violence right now and preparing for an actual civil war. Let's take apart three key dimensions of how this is so, and take a lead from Bob Avakian on what is needed instead. First, the wokesters and the fascists both take up an epistemology that is a framework for understanding what is true that denies objective reality. Both insist that the truth is whatever they say it is, or whatever serves their political objectives. This is not just unscientific, this is aggressively anti-scientific. Think about it. The fascists still insist that the 2020 election was stolen. Their ranks are chock full of unthinking Christian fascists who deny the basic fact of evolution. And they include QAnon conspiracy theorists convinced that Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks are running a child sex ring. All the mountains of evidence that disprove their fantastical theories? Dismissed as fake news. For their part, the wokesters often speak to real phenomenon, such as the oppression of Black people. But their view of how you find the truth shares a lot with these fascists. The wokesters insist that there is no truth. There are just different narratives for each individual or each identity group. We've all heard this a million times. You have your truth, I have my truth, she has her truth. The wokesters openly argue that there is no such thing as objective reality. Tema Okun, for example, in a paper that is widely wielded by these wokesters, openly classifies objectivity as part of white supremacy culture. This wokeness shuts down any substantive debate over what's true, insisting instead that only those who directly experience oppression, or as they like to call it, marginalization, can understand what it is or what should be done about it. Others are told to check their privilege, shut up, and just follow behind whoever is deemed to be the most marginalized, with no real consideration for where they are leading. As Bob Avakian put it in his piece, BIPOC leadership, there is no such thing. Quote, "Of course, people who are oppressed have a lot to say about the effects of that oppression, and that is obviously important. But understanding where the oppression comes from and what to do about it requires most fundamentally taking up and applying a scientific method and approach to dig down to the underlying causes of things. And it is that scientific method and approach that will enable people, whatever their identity, to lead things where they need to go." All this points to this crucial fact. What is of really decisive importance is not what identity people may be part of, but what is the content of their ideas and programs. And if those ideas and programs are taken up and followed and implemented, what would this lead to? Second, both the wokesters and the fascists are trying to make the system of capitalism imperialism work to their own advantage. The fascists have grown out of and are a hideous concentration of the ugliest and most defining qualities of the system of capitalism imperialism as it has developed here in America. Its foundational and unresolvable white supremacy, its vicious male supremacy, its anti-immigrant xenophobia, and its celebration of American supremacy. They are a response by a powerful section of the rulers of this country to the profound crisis their system is facing. And they are moving rapidly to shred norms, ransack fundamental rights of the people, and remake society in the service of their gruesome MAGA program. For their part, the wokesters have a political program of striving for inclusion and representation of the so-called marginalized within the system of capitalism imperialism. And wokesters attempt to force any opposition to injustice into the service of this objective, often very directly insisting that it is them or those who look like them who should get hired, get published, or get elected to power as the ultimate goal. This has led, and can only lead, to masses of people getting played again and again. Seriously, on this 20-year anniversary of the illegitimate, unjust, immoral war on Iraq, do you really think it makes one shred of difference to the Iraqis whose homeland was invaded and bombed and millions displaced that Colin Powell, who played a decisive role in lying the U.S. into that war in the first place, was the first Black Secretary of State? We don't need new inclusive faces atop this murderously oppressive system. What is needed instead is to seek out the roots of oppression in this system itself and fight to end this oppression for everyone all over the world by overthrowing this system and building a radically different system and new world. Third, this fascist lunacy and woke insanity overlap in their morality. Both are willing to trample people and their rights in the service of their goals, and both, in different ways, are fighting for their share of American privilege. The fascists are fighting for the forgotten white male to regain his place atop the American empire, lashing out against any rights that have been gained by black people, by women, by LGBT people, or others. In the service of this goal, they are using the power of the state to trample the rule of law, to steal the right to abortion, to terrorize trans youth, and they are unleashing violent mobs against anyone standing in their way. For their part, the wokesters use social media mobs to tear people down and cancel them, depriving them of public platforms, getting them fired, ruining their reputations, often for minor or completely subjective reasons, and often simply on the word of someone from among an oppressed group who accuses them of some transgression. Meanwhile, these wokesters insist that they themselves be guarded against any triggering phenomenon, sheltering in safe spaces that hide from the real world, not only ignoring, but indulging in the privilege that comes from living in the USA, a country whose wealth and power rests on brutal exploitation and oppression throughout the world, backed up by the massive violence of the American military. So to be clear, once again, it is the fascists that are by far doing the greater damage and who pose the greater threat to humanity's future. But this wokeism is an enormous straitjacket on many, including especially youth and students who urgently need to be standing up against and fighting this fascism as part of getting organized for a real revolution. And the more extreme and lunatic the expressions of this wokeness become, the more they are giving fodder to the fascists to seize on. Hardly a day goes by that Fox News doesn't feature some lunatic wokeness gone wild to whip up their fascist base to wage their war against any and all calls for a more just society and world. The danger of this dynamic is captured well, even if in a way that itself embodies anti-trans bigotry, in a tweet from a fascist former congressman from Iowa, Steve King, that Bob Avakian has highlighted in several of his talks. Quote, "Folks keep talking about another civil war. One side has about 8 trillion bullets, while the other side doesn't know which bathroom to use." King is pointing to the actual, real possibility of civil war and mocking the way in which this woke stuff is totally disarming those who will be the targets of it. We cannot allow this dynamic to continue. Our side desperately and urgently needs to completely break out of this wokeness and any defensiveness in the face of it, and take up the serious struggle to understand and change this world, the real world, in the interest of humanity as a whole. To that end, these words from Bob Avakian in his piece, Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating, provide direction and leadership.
Instead of staying in your lane and going for self,
I stay in my lane. Always put you first.
While this system is moving to even more decisively crush any hope for a world worth living in, people need to be looking at the bigger picture, focusing on the greater interests of humanity and the possibility for a far better world, and acting to make this a reality. Instead of snarking and sniping at each other and being divided by identities, people should be working to unite everyone from every part of society who can be united in the fight against oppression and injustice, with the goal of putting an end to this system that is the source of this oppression and injustice.
Next, on this week's RNL Show, we're going to bring you an important video and discussion responding to 2 major developments on the danger the world faces from the destruction of the climate. In a few minutes, I will be joined by John Headland, who's a college instructor and a member of the Environmental Writing Group, a group of people in the sciences who contribute to revcom.us and to the RNL Show. John, together with this writing group, created this video that's responding to the 2021 IPCC report. The IPCC, the initials of which stand for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and it's an international body for assessing the science related to climate change, and it is sponsored in part by the United Nations. We are showing the 2021 video because it is completely relevant to this latest report. And the just released 2023 IPCC report indicates that the dangerous trajectory pointed to in 2021 is accelerating with the window closing. Before we go to this foreboding global assessment, I would be remiss not to at least mention the other big environmental crime of this system of the past week that underscores the IPCC's report, which was from that great friend of the environment, President Joe Biden, who not all that long ago literally said, quote, "No more drilling on federal land, period, 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 period," end quote. Then, this past week, he turns around and gave the go-ahead to drill 600 million barrels of oil in the largest federally protected area in the United States, a fragile ecosystem in the Arctic, Alaska. Not only will this do direct damage from this precarious but gently named Willow Project shoot 9 million metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere, but greenlighting this now sends a message to the whole world that the U.S., the country that has done the most damage to the atmosphere, will keep doing so. This is how the workings and the logic of the capitalist imperialist system is driving humanity off a cliff. This is not mainly because the fossil fuel business is highly profitable, but because the political and military needs of the U.S. to stay top boss in the dog-eat-dog imperialist system, with the proxy war in Ukraine now the driving factor in throwing out any concern for the environment in a war fueled by fossil fuel. The fate of humanity and the planet be damned. Go to revcom.us to read the article, Biden Drills for Oil in Pristine Alaskan Wilderness. So, John, earlier in today's Revolution Nothing Less show, we got into how people watching this show, and especially the interviews we did with Bob Avakian, opens up a whole different way for people to understand the world, to feel that the world really could be different, that there really is a whole other way we could be living through a real revolution. You co-wrote a segment for the RNL Show about the 2021 IPCC report. And you've told us that you show this, or actually a version of this, to your students. You discuss it in class and you have them write about it. This is the main thing I want to learn about from you today. But first, let's just have a brief first pass on the just released 2023 IPCC report on the state of the environment. The World Resources Report says that 2,000 pages are grim reading. But mirroring the IPCC report, they conclude by saying, quote, "A narrow window of opportunity is still open, but there's not 1 second to waste. Yet, the whole report reveals that there is among the major world imperialist polluters no intention of doing that, no direction in that direction, with Biden's greenlighting the Willow Project a case in point." So, John, even as I know how serious the situation is, nonetheless, I was really taken aback by these drastic changes in the Earth's climate. And these are some of the things you brought out in your report on 2021. But these statistics just, they really shock me. The concentrations of carbon dioxide unmatched for at least 2 million years. Glaciers have retreated unmatched for 2,000 years. The last decade was warmer than any period in 125,000 years. Sea levels rising faster than any prior century for 3,000 years. The summer Arctic's ice cover smaller than any time in 1,000 years. Ocean warming faster than any time since the end of the last ice age. And ocean acidification at the highest level of the last 26,000 years. Can you try and put this in perspective for us and encapsulate what these assessments mean for our future?
Yeah, well, you know, we're really at a time and a moment in history right now where what we do over the next few years will impact the next thousands of years. We have as you said, a very short and rapidly closing window of time. Oftentimes, the year that's put out there is 2030, right? To rapidly reduce and curtail carbon dioxide emissions in order to give humanity and the planet a chance at a viable future, not even a guarantee, but a chance at a viable future. There are a lot of calamitous and harmful effects that are already baked in now. And that's one of the things that really comes through in this report, in this IPCC report, is that a lot of damage has already been done. And the effects and the reverberations of that will be felt for the next thousands of years. But there is a brief window of time within which we can wrench dramatic changes in how the entire economy is structured from top to bottom, namely, but not exclusively, the burning of fossil fuels. And if we don't do that in the next few years, there is the possibility that the future will then be out of humanity's hands, that we might hit trigger points and tipping points within which cascading climate change will become irreversible and will no longer be dependent on what we do or don't do. So that's really what we're looking at. It's that serious, it's that grave. And it comes through in the IPCC report, but also it must be said that the IPCC report, in certain respects, is overly rosy, even in its diagnosis of the problem.
Well, I think what you said is important, John, because we're not here to shock people into anything. We're trying to tell them the world as it actually is. And that should be it is shocking enough that people should wake up, look at this situation, and see if in this moment people do organize and do come to see the problems in the system, and we actually can make a revolution in this, the world's greatest polluter, then we have a shot at reversing this. But John, as I said earlier, I was very interested to learn that you show a version of the film that you and the Environmental Writers Group have made for the RNL Show. It's kind of a more extensive version. And you ask your students to write about it after you have a class discussion. And this is the kind of engagement of what we do on this show and what the Bob Avakian Interviews are all about. And it's essential that this get out there broadly, shaking and waking people up, both to the harsh reality that's unfolding that we've been talking about, and the potentially for a radically different world. And we need more and more teachers at the secondary school level and the universities doing the same thing. So what I want to learn from you is what's been the response? What have you learned about what this provokes among the generation of young people going to college today?
Yeah, so, as you said, I teach at the university level, and I assign my students a related RNL Show segment. It presents the scale and scope of the climate crisis, some basic facts of the science of global warming, an overview of its effects, what's driving it, the solution being revolution, and how a revolutionary socialist society would be able to deal with this crisis. So my students, they watch a paper they watch and write a paper on this segment. And I've been doing this for a few semesters now. So I've read hundreds of papers that students have written on this, in dealing with the questions that are raised in the content that's in this clip. And there's a couple of things that really stand out in their responses to this segment. And one is that, overwhelmingly these students, these young people, mainly young people, are deeply concerned and distraught by the climate crisis. Almost overwhelming, right? And almost across, kind of political lines or, political, the viewpoints or perspectives or camps. It reveals that there's a tremendous, untapped well of anguish, of fear, of distress, of a kind of, almost existential dread, but also a fury among the younger generations in particular when it comes to the state of the planet and in the climate crisis. And I think in some ways it's similar to what we saw, some of what we saw among young people, particularly younger women and girls, in their anger and fury over the right to abortion being stripped from them. This is their future, that's on the line. And a lot of them know that, in a basic level, they understand that. They recognize that this is a very serious problem and that things are generally going in the wrong direction. And for many students, and I don't necessarily teach at a particularly, liberal or, left-leaning, college campus, that they recognize that capitalism is at least a part of why this climate crisis is happening, and in a basic way, see that capitalism is destructive for the environment. There's all kinds of non-scientific and wrong ideas that are bound up with that about why it's happening, that it's greed, it's human nature, it's unchecked capitalism, etc. That the Democrats are doing much better on this than the Republicans, and so on. But this leads me to another thing that really stands out in their responses, which is that most of them have a very hard time actually envisioning how society could be different. How revolution could actually be possible in a country like this, how a revolutionary society would enable us to go at this climate crisis in a way that actually gives us a real shot at halting and in fact reversing it. They've never heard anything like this before. They've never, and I say that in my assignment, I'm like, you've probably never heard anything like this before. It is going to shock you. It is going to be different. It is going to be new. It is going to challenge and provoke you. And it does. It poses for them, and it gets them asking some very big and important and I think vital, questions about this society, about this system that we live under. And then, one thing, in the Earth Day 2021 segment, there's a quote in the video from Bob Avakian about the need to apply science, not just to natural phenomena like, the climate change, or the science of global warming, the science of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to society. And it's striking to me that many students remark on and are provoked by this quote, that I'm teaching a social science class, but they haven't really considered that you could apply the scientific method to understanding the social world, to getting at the underlying dynamics and driving forces, the historical development of society, in a way that can explain why we're in the situation we're in. So that's something that many students comment on, and I think it's a provoking and challenging thing, and it's I have to say, it's kind of a damning indictment of the state of academia, that people in a social science course have never considered the possibility of thinking scientifically about society. But there's not a lot of actual science being applied in the social sciences these days, and there's a lot of wrong anti-scientific thinking in the social sciences. But those are just some initial, and there's a wide range of of course, of responses and engagement. But those are some, I think, those are some striking assessments, I think, that I have.
Well, they are very striking and very thought-provoking to me. And what I want to do is show the segment, because it does actually bring some of the content to how a scientific approach to society in the first part reveals the source of the problem, and then the second half of this reveals how it indicates the solution in a new society with the Constitution for a New Socialist Republic, authored by Bob Avakian. So I want to say that you just successfully completed an application to come back on the RNL Show and discuss this further. So I want to thank you for bringing this experience to our audience, and I really hope that those of you out there who are teaching in secondary school and maybe even some more advanced middle school students, as well as college level, follow John's lead and take this segment, which will be posted on our YouTube page. So good to see you again, John, and thanks for this interview.
The new UN report on climate change, a more accurate and alarming picture of the peril facing our planet. On August 9th, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, or IPCC, released its eagerly awaited report on the global climate crisis. This report is the product of the cooperative work of hundreds of scientists around the world. The basic science of climate change and global warming has been well established for decades. This is the scientific understanding that human activity, namely the burning of fossil fuels like oil and natural gas, along with the clearing and thinning of forests, is causing the planet to warm. And this is having dire consequences. The new IPCC report represents a tremendous and important advance in this scientific understanding. It paints a clearer, more vivid picture of the devastating impact that climate change is already having. And it identifies some of the massive and even more devastating impacts of climate change that are now locked into the future for thousands of years to come. Let's talk about some of the report's key findings. Because of advances in the science of climate change, this report is able to draw a more direct link between the warming of the planet caused by the burning of fossil fuels and the widespread extreme weather events much of the planet is currently experiencing. These extreme events include this summer's deadly heat waves. July 2021 was the hottest month ever recorded. From the Pacific Northwest here in the US to Italy and Greece in southern Europe, people have experienced temperatures well above what is considered safe for humans and well beyond previously normal summer temperatures. The new IPCC report concludes that heat waves, which used to occur once every 50 years, will now occur once every 10 years, and that many of the heat waves currently experienced would have been extremely unlikely to occur without human-caused global warming. Because of climate change, tropical storms are becoming larger, stronger, wetter, and more dangerous. They are producing more rain, therefore increasing the risk of flooding. And combined with rising sea levels, which we will talk about more shortly, this flooding will gravely threaten the hundreds of millions of people worldwide who live in low-lying coastal areas. Hurricane Ida recently left a massive trail of damage in Louisiana and Mississippi, traveling up the eastern coast of the United States. This is an example of a tropical storm that is supercharged by climate change. A storm like Ida lasts longer because storms are slower moving due to climate change, and they dump more water and are more intense. The new IPCC report has determined that Category 3 to Category 5 storms, the most intense storms, have increased in frequency over the last 40 years due to climate change. With more global warming, such storms will become more frequent. The IPCC report also concludes that wildfires, like those in California, Oregon, and Colorado in the US, and in Turkey, Spain, and Greece, are happening more frequently because of climate change. Wildfires like the recent Caldor fire at Lake Tahoe and the Dixie Fire, the single largest fire in California's history, are happening more often because of a dangerous combination of factors. This is what the report calls the compound effects of higher temperatures, heat waves, and droughts driven by human-caused climate change. The new IPCC report also highlights long-term environmental changes that are now locked in to the future and will unfold over thousands and thousands of years, transforming the planet as we know it. Some of these already irreversible changes include rises in ocean temperature, higher acid content of ocean water, which harms many sea organisms, and reduction of oxygen in the oceans. These changes will lead to the dying off of many sea-dwelling species. These changes will also upset the fragile balance of the Earth's ecosystem, like coral reefs, and deplete crucial food sources for much of the planet. The IPCC report reinforces the understanding that warmer atmospheric temperatures and already rising ocean temperatures will lead to further sea level rise, as glaciers and massive ice sheets in the Arctic and Antarctic melt. The flooding that rising sea levels will cause has the potential to make whole sections of the planet unlivable for populations of different island countries and for low-lying countries like Bangladesh. The report builds on advances in scientific methods and findings in the last decade, which have enabled scientists to draw firmer and more definite conclusions about crucial questions, like how much the climate will warm if business as usual continues for decades. For example, scientists better understand more of the history of the Earth's climate changing and how this relates to carbon dioxide concentration. Another example is advances in ocean science. The oceans absorb massive amounts of heat from the atmosphere, and scientists have learned more about how much the oceans can soak up and how warming oceans interact with the temperature. All of this, along with advances in the actual computer models, underlie further certitude in sounding the alarm on the grave danger we face from climate change. This deepened understanding feeds into the most important takeaway message of this new IPCC report. When it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, we are running out of time and moving in the wrong direction. Governments are not acting in ways that correspond to the urgency of this crisis. Now let's talk about what the report doesn't say. In order to stop warming the planet, we need an entire restructuring of the global economy from top to bottom. This means a rapid shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, a transformation of the world agriculture system, and a fundamental change in how goods are produced, distributed, and consumed. The cold truth is that to seriously deal with climate change, you have to put the oil companies out of business, seize their assets, and leave most of the oil in the ground. To address this crisis requires global cooperation and collaboration. You need society-wide economic planning that puts social need and environmental imperatives in command. But none of this can happen under this system. This kind of full-scale transformation of society and economy is utterly at odds with how the world capitalist imperialist system functions. This is a system organized around production for profit, a system in which the great imperial powers compete and contend with each other for global control and influence, a system that is leading to ever-widening social inequalities between the rich capitalist imperialist countries and the poor countries of the global south that are suffering the greatest consequences of global warming. However, there is hope on a scientific basis. Those who care about the planet must confront the reality that to deal with climate change, we need system change. And system change requires a real revolution to overthrow capitalism and replace it with a socialist system on the road to communism. this revolution is possible. And not in some far-off, distant future. This is one of those rare times when a real revolution is actually possible in this country. And this is something that must be seized on and built for now. Only a genuinely socialist system can meet the needs of humanity and unleash the creativity, knowledge, and determination of people who agonize over this crisis to go to work on it and create a society and world that could interact with nature in a sustainable way. As it says in some key principles of socialist sustainable development, the new socialist society will put the interests of the preservation of the ecosystems of the entire planet above its own national development. It will encourage and give scientific, technical, and organizational backing for bold international initiatives to prevent widespread ecosystem collapse of coral reefs, rainforests, critical savanna regions, etc. A revolution in the former United States will put an end to the pollution-intensive, cheap labor, global manufacturing grids of production. The structure of production and the resource base of a new socialist economy will no longer rely on labor and materials from other countries, like cheap parts from hellish factories in Mexico and inflows of oil from abroad. The new society will provide technical and financial assistance for helping to clean up environmental damage in other parts of the world caused by the energy and mining operations, agribusiness and forestry, and industrial activities, as well as the export and dumping of toxic waste of the former U.S. empire. The new socialist state will immediately dismantle all military bases and occupations. It will vastly downsize the military industry and begin to convert huge components for productive social use. Think about what it would mean if a revolution were to take place right here in the belly of the beast, in the country most responsible for the climate crisis. While nothing is guaranteed in regard to this crisis, a revolution would enable humanity to begin working on this problem right away and would open up the possibility of the large-scale transformations required to curb carbon emissions from fossil fuels and shift to renewable energy on the scale that's required. And the new revolutionary society would serve as a base area to spread revolution to other parts of the world. It would be a source of hope and daring to people all over the world, and an inspiration for ecologically sustainable socialist development the world over. For more information, check out The Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian, the special resource page on the environmental emergency, and the special issue of Revolution newspaper on the environment at revcom.us.
All right, so we have reached the end of this, our 140th episode of the Revolution Nothing Less show. Andy, before we close out, I was hoping you would share just a little bit about the Patreon-only Zoom that you and Pete held with some of our supporters.
Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. It was the beginning of forging a community among people and a conversation among people who regularly watch the show and support the show. In the segment on the BA interviews, I referred to one comment that was made there that we learned from, and actually it inspired the discussion I had with John Hedlund on his teaching of the utilizing the segment from the show. So I just want to encourage our audience to become Patreons and to be part of these calls. We've decided we're going to try to do a call every month with the Patreons, and join us with that. I'll have more to bring out about it in a future episode where we can really dig into what that Patreon support is for, and what it means to forge a community around the show, and how we're going to grow the audience of the RNL show and the interviews we did with Bob Avakian.
Yeah, so we want to encourage every one of you watching for the first time or many, many times in, please, if you are not yet, become a Patreon. $3 a month, $10 a month, $50 a month, whatever fits your budget, but be part of the community supporting this show and spread this show to friends, family, online. Be sure to leave a comment below letting us know what you thought or questions you have off today's episode.
And so that's it for this 140th show of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. We'll be back next week on Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And in the middle, you can figure your time out. So good night.
Good night.